We're 2 races into the Formula One season and things haven't got any better for Ferrari. If it wasn't bad enough that their car is clearly off the pace, drivers Sebastian Vettel and Charles Leclerc managed to drive into each other at the start of the Styrian Grand Prix. Ed Straw and Scott Mitchell are here with me, Glenn Freeman, to discuss what's really going on at Ferrari and just how bad it is. And Scott, really, we have to look beyond the collision, don't we? And how much deeper Ferrari's problems were and how apparent it became this weekend.
Yeah, well, we can't hide from the fact that the reason that they came together is because they were in proximity to each other in the F1 midfield, and running 10th and 11th was exactly where they deserved to be. That was a merited 10th and 11th in the worst way possible for Ferrari, and this all goes. It all can be traced back to their miserable pre-season and the fundamental problems that they have with the design of the 2020 car, and then worst of all, just when they thought that there was a bit of optimism because they'd been able to fast track some upgrades and take them to the second half of the Red Bull Ring doubleheader instead of having them for the Hungarian Grand Prix, the upgrades didn't work. There was a good bit of optimism around the place on Friday after FP2. The headline times were misleading. I dug into the numbers a little bit more and went back through laps and laps of onboards, and you could see visibly a difference. It looked better. Everything sounded better. And it just seemed to be like they'd been making sort of an under-radar step, and then as soon as qualifying started and it was wet, the car went backwards instead of forwards. So it just shows that it's not just the changes, the beefed up engine regulations to stop any wrongdoing there that's caught Ferrari out. Yes, they've got an underpowered engine, but they've got a bad car, and their attempts to make it better haven't worked so far.
And Ed, looking at the crash just for a moment, it was clumsy, wasn't it? You know, Leclerc stuck his nose in perhaps where he shouldn't. I seem to be one of the only people who think it was strange how much of a gap Vettel opened before he turned in. But was this symptomatic of a team and drivers who really aren't used to having to race in the pack like they had to last weekend?
I think there's a little bit of that. When you're down the order, there's a lot more moving parts that can influence where the spaces come and go. George Russell talked about this. He said there's all these concertina effects that you have to get used to that you're not used to when you're up at the front. And I think that's what sucked Charles Leclerc into it. It's compounded by the fact that they've got a stronger car on race pace as well. So there's this extra premium on them attacking on the first lap as well. Because if they can make up places, they can transform their prospects for the race. So there's that low-hanging fruit. The cheap place gains is what they're both going for. And I think that's what led to that situation overall. And it was just so congested. You looked at Vettel, he moved left a bit because there was also George Russell there to think about. So yeah, the complexities of being in that position. The trouble is, it means that in order to get the optimum results that they can deliver in the races on current pace, they're going to have to be coming from this, what might be called a Q3 marginal position when they're qualifying 5th row, 6th row, and they really need to go for it. So I can see this situation arising again, not necessarily hitting each other, but bits of Ferrari on the track on the first lap of Grand Prix because they've been pressing on. It's just symptomatic of it never rains but it pours, isn't it? You have a little bit of an underachievement on pace, and it's compounded by making the first laps that bit harder.
I would say there's good news and bad news for Ferrari fans on that front. The good news is that Charles Leclerc is the sort of guy who doesn't make the same mistake twice. So I'm sure if he finds himself in this position again, he won't do this exact mistake again. The bad news for Ferrari fans is I think he will find himself in this position again because, as Ed said, it is a Q3 marginal car.
And let's talk about if there is any other good news for Ferrari, Scott, because what sort of timeline should we be looking at here for a genuine recovery?
Well, I'm going to look at this from a sort of longer term perspective because I don't see personally what Ferrari can do for their fundamental performance deficit. So on the engine side, looking at it from that point of view, I'll leave Ed to delve into their mess of a race car. But from the engine side, which is clearly an area where they've had a decline, you're looking at a situation where they can't make upgrades in season because development's frozen. So in terms of improving their engine and their qualifying modes for the rest of the year, done, out of the question, not going to happen. So now the attention has to turn to 2021 because what they do in the next 6 months to set their engine specification for the 2021 season could define Ferrari's competitiveness in qualifying, at least from an engine point of view, for years to come. Because the way F1's rules are going to work, they're going to all re-homologate their engines for 2021, and then they're going to be allowed one upgrade in 21, but then that specification gets used again as the base specification for 22, 23, and 24. So there's one upgrade through 21, one upgrade through 22, but then no upgrades in 2023 and 2024. So you can see why I'm concerned for Ferrari's long-term prospects. They've basically got 6 months to determine how good their engine's going to be for the next 4 years. And looking at how bad it is now, I really don't fancy their chances of moving from the bottom of the order where they are to the top of the order where they were last year before all of those question marks over legality arose.
It basically renders the rest of the season a glorified test. The absolute priority, as Scott says, is to get on top of the engine deficit and also understand the weaknesses in their car design on the aero side. So really, they just got to get what points they can. Whether they're 3rd, 4th, 5th in the Constructors' Championship is secondary to making that progress and making sure they really know what they're trying to work on. But the engine is a huge deal. That's not something you can kind of cure in battle, as it were. You've got to do that back at base with your dyno work, with some clever engineering, working out how to get those extra power, that extra power in the qualifying situation. So this is a very, very long haul for Ferrari. And I would say if I was them, 2022 is the thing I'd be worrying about. Not only is the engine got to be right, they've got to understand their aero weaknesses, because they've not quite got this car right, even though the engine is probably certainly the number one weakness.
Scary times for Ferrari then. Who knows? Hungary might be a bit better, not such a power or drag sensitive circuit, but it feels like the problems are going to be a bit more longer term than that. So I'm sure we'll be talking about Ferrari's troubles again soon on the race. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel if you want to keep up with all of our analysis of F1 and the world of motorsport, and we'll see you again very soon.